Hey, everybody, welcome back to Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast on the podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis, and it is Thursday night, and we are trying our very best to stay on this schedule. So because of the fact that we are actually right now recording a Bryant Heating and Cooling weekend kickoff show for the Notre Dame game, this episode of Talking Stuff was pre-recorded a little bit earlier than it's being aired, and that's why there's no live stream of it this week. But I promise when we can do the live streams, we will. Andrew, how are you? How are things? What's new?
I'm good. My wife got me some crumble cookies, which I ate today, so that was good.
Have you had insomnia cookies?
I have not. I've heard good things, and I love cookies, so I'm all about that life, and I would like to try them.
It's very different, the style crumble versus insomnia. Insomnia does a really great job with like ice cream and other stuff involved in the cookie process, but just from a straight up like cookie battle, I think crumble gets the edge, but it's close. What insomnia does really well is keep cookies warm, especially chocolate chip cookies, which are the only cookies that anyone should eat. But you know, it is what it is.
I had a monster cookie and a like brown sugar, like the Pop-Tart brown sugar. I think they're kind of like to mimic those. They were amazing, but very healthy too. But mostly I'm just looking forward to the Notre Dame game, which everybody is in the same boat there. So very much looking forward to Saturday. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that game will have a ton of Ohio State recruiting targets in the stadium. Maybe not all of them that have been like big time targets for Ohio State or guys that are really being talked about now or guys that maybe will be talked about more 6 months from now as Notre Dame hosts basically every recruit that they are going after. Some of these guys will pop up on the Ohio State board later in the cycle, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. I will be on the field in South Bend, hoping to get as many photos of kids as I can. Never been there before, so I don't really know the setup and what I'm allowed to do. But before we really leap forward, I think we have to go back. Last Thursday night, we did Talking Stuff, and one name we did not mention at all was Eric Mensah, a 3-star defensive tackle who was committed to Virginia Tech until Friday morning when he woke everyone up by committing to Ohio State and flipping his commitment. It's fascinating for a number of reasons. The first and foremost to me is that he never even officially announced that he had an Ohio State offer. So there was no reason for anyone to have that on the radar. But the Buckeyes did host him for a camp in June, and he was pretty impressive at 6'3", almost 300 pounds, moved really well, big, wide-bodied defensive tackle prospect. The Buckeyes offered him, he told me about a month before he made the switch, but he said he just didn't feel like he should announce it when he was committed to Virginia Tech. He then took an official visit to Ohio State for the home game against Youngstown State, and 5 days later pulls the trigger, commits to Ohio State. I asked him why, and he said very simply, it's because of Larry Johnson, and he wants the opportunity to play football for Larry Johnson. It's another defensive tackle, which is one of those things where Ohio State fans, I think, justifiably go, but we need edge rushers, so why are we taking more defensive tackles? Big picture, it's this. You have Justin Scott committed in the class of 2024, 5-star, number 1 ranked defensive tackle, so you feel pretty good there. Edric Houston as a 3-tech / outside guy. He's a combo type defensive lineman. He wants to play the edge. Going to be sort of that JT Tuimoloau body type. We'll see how he grows as he gets into college. But if you have those two and then you can go out and get a developmental player like Mensa on the inside, I think it's a pretty good win for Ohio State, even though it doesn't really move the needle from a recruiting standpoint, like national rankings or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think you asked him why he committed to Ohio State, and he said because of Larry Johnson. And the reason this one snuck up on a lot of people also is because of Larry Johnson and how he kind of handles things here. But I agree with you. I think if you're sitting here with a class with 0 defensive linemen and Mensa commits to Ohio State, then that's going to raise the alarm bells. But I agree with 2 guys already in the fold, taking a guy like this to be your 3rd guy for the class. I don't have an issue with it. Now you just got to go and get some edge rushers. So yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, he's wide, man. The kid is a wide bodied kid. I liked what I saw from him at camp in June. The fact is Ohio State is entering these next 2 months with the mindset that Tyleik Williams, Michael Hall, and Ty Hamilton will not be on the roster a year from now. And so while you look at the current roster makeup and you think you don't maybe need another defensive tackle in this class, if you take those guys out of it, then realize you have essentially Tywone Malone for 1 more year, and then unproven guys with Will Smith, Hero Canoe, Jason Moore, and Caden McDonald, I guess I can see where you make this push. freaky athletic kid. Growing up, he was a soccer player. He's born in the U.S. Family background is Nigerian. He got excellent footwork for a kid his size, but it's just not playing a lot against very good competition in Virginia where he's at. And it is a flyer, and there's no other way to put it. But sometimes taking a flyer is not a bad thing, and I think that's what I'm trying to underline here. Like, it's not bad to take a project sometimes, because the fact of the matter is, in the world of college football 2023, this is a kid who you don't worry about the NIL stuff with. It's a kid who is willing to put in 3 to 4 years of development, and that is key, because you have to build a roster that's going to be here not just next year, but 4 years from now.
Yeah, and Larry Johnson has had some success with kids like this. Some of those under the radar guys, like the Robert Landers types or the Hamilton types. So I mean, I'm totally good with it. And now he's got 3 months between now and the early signing period. I guess 5 months if you want to look to February to add at least hopefully one defensive end, and ideally 2. So we got some time for that, but it's kind of running out.
Who those players are going to be, that's the interesting conversation. We'll find out a lot more next week when the Buckeyes coaches actually get out on the road and can visit kids during the Ohio State off week. But, for the current situation, the commitment of Mensa is a surprise for sure. But it's not something where you look at it and go, why would you waste that spot? You have 23 commitments. The Buckeyes could take up to 27 or 28 in this class if they really want to get aggressive. And so you just look at it and say, down the road, what can this guy become? A guy like Jaden McKenzie, for example, who was a higher ranked player than Mensa, is now in his 5th year at Ohio State and contributing and finally starting to make plays. And sometimes it seems like those players only exist in the room of Larry Johnson at Ohio State. So you'll take it for what it is and you move on. It's not a big deal in the world of recruiting, but anytime you wake up, and that was one that was completely caught me out of the blue. I was at the grocery store when it happened and was a little behind. So that happens occasionally, I guess. Where we're also trying to catch up is Chance Robinson, the 4-star wide receiver from Miami's Fort Lauderdale area, St. Thomas Aquinas High School, big time wide receiver prospect, committed to Miami, showed up at Ohio State a week ago for the Buckeyes home game against Western Kentucky, a game that we knew was going to be a high-flying, high-passing, aerial assault type game. So it'd be fun to watch for any receiver. And it's probably a good one for Chance Robinson to show up for. Perfect day weather-wise. First visit for him, unofficial visit. Andrew, you said Saturday that you had seen rumblings on the Miami board on Friday night, some of the Miami message boards, that they were concerned about where things were going with Robinson. What do you make of it now?
I mean, I think the fact, if you're a Miami fan and you see a kid go visit Ohio State at all, but for an unofficial visit, knowing that he could very well get back to Ohio State for an official visit, and you see, Ohio State throws the ball all over the place. Brian Hartline does what he does. Miami is having a pretty good season thus far, all things considered. I just think you see a kid like that take a trip to Ohio and, not in I guess the weather's been nice, but, I don't know. That's just always going to be a concern for them. So I think that's probably why they're a little bit worried about it, but the proximity to Miami is going to help them. But if he comes back to Ohio State, that's going to be a serious problem for Mario Cristobal, I think.
Yeah, and that's the plan right now. So he's set or planning on being at Ohio State for the October 21st home game against Penn State. I think that's what would make this more concerning if you're a Hurricanes fan, is that if a kid takes one visit and it's an official visit and it's a big game weekend, there's not a lot of opportunity for the Ohio State coaches to really spend time with him and get to know him. The fact that he was up here a month before that official visit says a lot, because the Ohio State coaching staff was able to spend a lot better quality time with him during Western Kentucky game weekend than they would for the Penn State game weekend. And then the fact that the plan is to return and it's announced almost immediately as soon as he gets back, that I think would raise some flags if you're, a Hurricane watcher. And so for Ohio State, they want 4 wide receivers in this class. The funny thing is that we have talked at length about the way Jeremiah Smith is being recruited by other schools, or Jeremiah McClellan wearing Oregon shoes a few weeks ago, or, Missouri still obviously trying to get back in that one. You may be able to get a flip out of Chance Robinson and end up with 4 receivers, and then you may still end up having to find a 4th again in November or December if things go wonky with someone else.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an Ohio State fan, I feel like you don't really expect that to happen just because Brian Hartline. But I don't know. I feel like taking 4 makes sense. And, Miami fans have probably kind of scarred because of Brandon Ennis, because of Jeremiah Smith being committed to Ohio State. I feel like 4 is a good number to have. And really, that's the guy that's out there right now to be that number 4. But I feel good about the other guys that are committed right now personally, but that's just me.
Yeah, you should. There's not a lot of reason for concern around any of those guys, but it's just a weird thing how this world of recruiting now seems to spin. The facts are this: Ohio State will lose Marvin Harrison, will lose Mecca Ibuka, will lose Xavier Johnson, could lose Julian Fleming. You never know what happens with Kojo Antwi or Keon Grays or even Jaden Ballard amongst the non-true freshmen on the roster. Then you have to figure out, do all 4 true freshmen stick around? So I think at this point we're at a juncture for Ohio State. We're taking 4 receivers at almost every class seems necessary. The way that they're throwing the ball, the way they're developing, the way that guys are leaving early. So, I think it's just what you have to do.
Yeah, and I think if you see some of the current Ohio State commits, maybe take some unofficial visits to other campuses and you get worried about it. I saw where Gene Smith talked today about, unofficial visitors asking like $5,000 just to go on unofficials. So if they're doing that, maybe that's why they're doing it. And it's not so much just, hey, I'm on flip alert or anything like that. But I don't know. That's just my perspective on things, I guess.
Yeah. That's something we've talked about a lot. There are schools out there who are willing to pay that, and probably some schools that are paying even more than that. And that's the reality why, we've said Ohio State does not engage in that sort of thing. But on the same token, like maybe it helps Ohio State in some ways because it affords Jeremiah Smith the opportunity to get his family to Columbus twice in a 5-week stretch, because otherwise, he would maybe not have the ability to do that. Now, it's wholly illegal for teams to do that, and the NCAA knows it, but there is no infraction committee. There is no one really making sure that people are being punished for breaking the rules. So who cares? I guess it is unfortunate, but that is the way it goes. And I actually do you think that it's like good that Gene Smith is doing that in Congress and putting it out there, or do you think that people around the country will be like, "Oh, how dare sour grapes, Ohio State"?
Oh, it's absolutely going to be sour grapes, Ohio State. But I'm with you. I'm glad that he said that. There's going to be some like guardrails put into place eventually, and they're going to be enforced eventually. Is that going to be a year from now or 10 years from now? Who knows? But I have no issue with him coming out and saying something about it.
Yeah, I think at this point, like, we know this stuff is happening, so why keep doing it in the dark? The reality is the NCAA has opened up official visits for kids to take as many as they want, but if schools around the country are treating unofficial visits like official visits by paying for things, then basically some southern schools and even some northern schools are ending up getting the equivalent of 3 or 4 official visits for kids and their families. And if you don't think that makes a major difference, then you're just not paying attention. Like, those are the weekends when you get a chance to really connect with kids and their people. The game day weekends are not when that happens. Official visit weekends, especially, that's why Ohio State does them in the summer, because that's when you get to know kids and know their families. And if you continue to have a visit happening once every month and a half, once every 2 months, where you're being paid to be there, like, that is a huge advantage. And someone has to find a way to put a curtail that behavior, or at least get it out in the open so that everyone can start doing it.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's just these things seem to take forever for these changes to happen. So it's just a matter of like, when is it going to happen? So I'm not crossing my fingers it's going to happen anytime soon, but we'll see if it does at some point in the next 5-10 years. I don't know.
I kind of like Gene Smith just like throwing a grenade as he's walking away, though. Like, hey, let's just throw this out there. I thought it was more interesting. He said when he started as an athletic director when he was 29 years old that he never would have imagined he'd be standing asking for Congress for help. But right now, the game of college football is on such a weird, precarious footing that anything that people can do to uniform or find some uniformity amongst the rules is so vital and so important. But that's what it is. That's a weird rant. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, for the next couple of years. But we're also going to talk about Ohio State and the visit from Nathan Roberts, their top 2025 tight end target. And we'll get to that in just 1 second on Talking Stuff. Okay, Andrew. So Nate Roberts visited, right? He did an episode of Bermanology with me last Thursday night where he talked about how important it was for him to see the Ohio State offense feature the tight end. I'm on the field for the Western Kentucky game. There's 5 minutes to go in the first half. I look up at the scoreboard and realize there's 5 minutes to go in the first half, and I start to think about Nate Roberts, which is weird because I shouldn't be thinking about Nate Roberts in that moment. But I thought to myself, oh boy, they haven't thrown the ball to the tight end even once in this game, and it's 25 minutes into the game. And then the next play was a pass to Cade Stover that went for some 30 yards, and then they throw to the tight end between Stover and G. Scott, I think 9 times out of the next like 20 passes. And when I talked to Nate Roberts on Sunday after the visit, he said he was just thrilled with the way that the Buckeyes use the tight end. Do you think that assistant coaches go to the play caller during a game and say, by the way, I need you to throw the damn ball to the tight end because this kid's here, and if you don't do it, we're screwed? Or do you think that it's just that they would not do that because why would you mess with the flow of the game?
I kind of doubt they do that. On any given like home game, there's going to be so many visitors there. It's hard to like please everybody. So I don't think it happens, but I've thought about it before. Like when Jeremiah Smith's visiting Florida State, are they going to air it out more? But I think they stick to the plan. Maybe there's a little bit of planning during the week about like, hey, let's whip this play out or whatever. But I kind of think it has very little impact on things. That's just my belief.
Yeah, you're probably right. But they do have a chance with Nate Roberts to have him there on Friday where they're showing him the game plan. They're showing them, okay, this is what we're going to do with the tight end. So it does matter that they then prove it and that they back it up with action. 90 plus yards for Stover, second time this season out of 3 games. Like they're the same body type, 6'5", 240 pounds. Roberts, the recruitment is going to be very, very, very interesting from this point. Okay. I think everyone understands it's an Ohio State and Oklahoma fight at the top, but this is a kid that's going to see a lot of places. And one of the things that I took away from last weekend from talking to people around the Ohio State program is that there's at least more of a thought about how NIL factors into this recruitment than they would have imagined initially. And I think that's fair because people think tight end is not a big, sexy money position or whatever. But it's 2023, and every kid who's a top 100 player in the country is going to have that be some discussion in their recruitment. Now, the question is, does it matter more than the comfort and familiarity he has with the staff or being close to home or, being close to his family in Ohio? Like, I think ultimately with Nate Roberts, the close to his family, which is something he talked about at length on that episode of Bermanology, is going to play a major role. And I think that will be the biggest factor. And the fact that he has a bunch of kids or a bunch of family in Ohio doesn't hurt the Buckeyes at all.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Just watching that Bermanology, he made it pretty clear like what he values, and the family was definitely a big part of that. And having some close by here in Ohio isn't a bad thing. You mentioned the NIL thing, and I don't hear a lot about Oklahoma being some Miami or Tennessee or Texas A&M level program when it comes to that. So I don't know if that's like a negative thing here if you're trying to kind of get a gauge on the Buckeyes' chances, but I don't know. Those are hard to win. We saw Josh Proctor came to Ohio State from Oklahoma, and that was one that they won. And, maybe this can be another one. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah, I think one of the weird things about NIL, and this is just me hypothesizing as opposed to having like hard evidence to support it. I think that there are teams like Missouri, for example, is one where they maybe aren't going to be as aggressive for a kid from California. Right. But if there's a kid in Missouri, they're going to do everything they can to make sure that they keep that kid home. And I think Oklahoma's in that same range. Someone that like David Stone, the defensive tackle who's committed to Oklahoma, he's from Oklahoma despite playing at IMG. Like I think you see more aggression when it's a kid who's from your home state because it means so much more to make sure that kid doesn't go somewhere else. Nate Roberts lives 20 minutes away from Oklahoma Stadium. Like that is a big deal. And I think that that's where maybe you would see the Sooners be willing to be a touch more aggressive than they would otherwise. But again, will that matter in the end? I don't know. I mean, Ohio State and Oklahoma, despite being 2 of the best programs in the country over the last 100 years, it's hard to put them on the same footing right now, despite the fact that Oklahoma's playing pretty well.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. It's going to be a tall task for Keenan Bailey. I don't know how I would handicap Ohio State chances right now. My thought process is probably going to be he stays close to home. I'm just basing that on my gut feeling. But if Keenan Bailey can pull this one out, it's going to be a huge win for him. It's his number 1 target for the 25 class.
Yeah, it was very important to get him on campus when they did. And again, Ohio State would like a pair of tight ends in that class. And there are 2 others with Luka Gilbert from Ohio and Lakota West High School that you sort of look at and okay, if the Buckeyes really go all in here, I don't think it's a problem for Luka Gilbert to be a commitment. He's like 6'8", 250 pounds. Like that's a kid that may end up growing into an offensive tackle. You never know. It's not going to be easy to keep him at tight end size. Then you have a player like Amari Winston in Georgia, who's a 6'3", 220 pound, more of an H-back type as opposed to being a true tight end. So there's a real need for someone like Nate Roberts in that class. And he's been identified and circled early by Ohio State and Keenan Bailey. There was a lot of frustration when he committed to Notre Dame at the time that he did. So getting that second opportunity, it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. That's a recruitment that I think like you could see it end way sooner than people think, but after an already having decommitted from Notre Dame, I think Roberts and his family may be going out of their way to delay to make sure that doesn't happen again. So big win for Ohio State to get him on campus early, but now the hard part is maintaining that momentum until a decision gets made without getting him back on campus, whatever. So, as a recruit, if you're in town for a 3-day weekend during the season, like that's a pretty telling sign that you're very interested in that school. You're not just flying in on Saturday morning and watching the game and going home Sunday morning. Like that's a real visit. That's as close to you as you get to an official visit inside of the season for a junior as you can get. Roberts told me the biggest takeaway for him during the trip was that he got to spend a weekend seeing what it was like to be an Ohio State Buckeye. And so that's a big win for Keenan Bailey to get to where they are. Now they got to finish it. They got to finish it because that's what they're not doing at offensive tackle right now. Andrew is finishing. Gerby Lambert picked Notre Dame on Tuesday night. Not a surprise. Ohio State sort of had conceded that one about 2 months ago. It's a recruitment that you knew the kid from a personality standpoint, maybe just not the right fit for Ohio State, and the size of the campus, the way the personalities of the program run. You got to be a very, very type A personality to succeed at Ohio State. You don't always have to be a loud vocal guy, but you got to have a butt ton of confidence to survive in that environment. Notre Dame with its much smaller campus, Notre Dame with its the academic focus was a much better fit. And Boston College was somewhere that I think like if they were even had a pulse on the football field, I think Gerby Lambert would have decided to stay home, but they don't. And so he's heading to Notre Dame. And then this weekend, Sunday, we get the Brandon Baker decision, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas. Those are the main players. And it just looks like it's going to be Texas. And that's no one's conceding yet, but it's getting to that point where the Buckeyes have realized that maybe this is one they're not going to win. And one of the questions on the Ohio State.Rivals message board early on Wednesday morning was, so what happens now at tackle? And there's only one answer, and that's Jordan Seaton or bust in the class of 2024. So, I thought maybe there'd be a chance Ohio State would look at the Luwinieski twins, whose names I'm probably mispronouncing that. They're committed to Michigan State. Obviously, Michigan State's falling apart a little bit. We'll see how that unfolds. But those two, I think if you miss on Seaton, then you could potentially say, hey, you know what? Let's just take another set of in-state twins. They're good players, but I don't know if they're not what you're looking for from that position right now if you're Ohio State, because you're looking for another tackle to complement Ian Moore who can come in and contribute very early.
Yeah, with Baker likely committing to Texas this weekend, it's the pickings are exceptionally thin right now. And they have a good offensive line class, but they just always seem to miss out on that big national name, whether it's a JC Latham or that kind of player. It's just a common theme, whether it's the previous regime or now. And Justin Fry's doing an awesome job, so I don't want to take anything away from him. Hard to get excited about Jordan Seaton unless he returns, and maybe Alabama. I know they won last weekend, but they're not looking particularly hot right now, so maybe they can make a move there. I feel like Bill Landis has suggested before, just like loading up on Ohio linemen and just hoping like maybe one or two of a group of 4 or 5 just hits and it's a home run. And
because they normally do. That's the thing. They normally do develop into an NFL player, but how soon does that happen? And Jordan Seaton, visited Alabama a couple weeks ago, said Alabama was his leader. He visited Colorado last weekend, said the Colorado separated themselves from the pack, and he saw things he's never seen. Like he was scheduled to be at Ohio State for the Maryland game on October 7th. In my mind, if that was when he made it, that is bad for Ohio State. That visit has been pushed back. He is now expected to make his official visit to Ohio State on November 11th for the Michigan State game. In my mind, that is a big win for Ohio State because now you get him closer to the end of his cycle. You get a better sense of exactly where he's at, what exactly is needed to win on the NIL front, because it's going to be an NIL heavy final decision without question. This is what happens when you're talking about top tier offensive tackles. And I do believe, and I say this, understanding how some may perceive it, understanding that some may think that I'm trying to look through this with scarlet colored glasses on. I do think that if Ohio State is going to overspend on a tackle, that you may be better served doing that with an athletic freak like Jordan Seaton over a guy like Brandon Baker. I'm not trying to mitigate the loss of Baker to Texas if that's where he ends up choosing. What I am saying is that you have a possibility with a guy like Seaton of a Paris Johnson type offensive tackle, whereas Baker is more of a Nick Petit-Frere offensive tackle, right? And 9 times out of 10, you're going to take the Paris Johnson. So if it comes down to it, I think Ohio State understanding their positioning, understanding the dire need at tackle moving forward in the program, I can see, and now having an additional month to put a plan together, I think that's actually a really positive thing for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I can see that. And the bottom line is if they add either one of those guys, Baker or Seaton, and I know we all think Baker's going to be committing to Texas. But if they add either one of those guys, this offensive line class goes from like a solid B or B minus to an A or an A plus. So that's, it's huge. And people have talked on the board a lot about NIL and 1870 and the different foundations and everything. It's like, why is maybe there is this like strong push to just build up funds for this potential left tackle type of player. Maybe they're doing that. I don't know, but that would be a dream scenario for Justin Frye, I think. So we'll see.
Yeah. Like I said last week, I don't think that there's a pile of money just sitting around anywhere. I think it's all about getting a plan together and saying, okay, what's it going to take? And then going out and finding that money, which is, again, some folks may believe that the school can just give them money, and that's just not the way it goes. They have to find businesses that are going to be providing these kids with opportunities to use their name, image, and likeness in order to get to give that money. So it's not like you can just step up and say, okay, we've got X amount of money for you. You don't have to do anything. You have to find businesses that want to play ball. And there are certainly some around the state, but as we talked about on last week's show, like some big name brand needs to jump in there and help out Ohio State, whether that's Limited or Kroger or whatever. Someone's got to do something. Otherwise, these are the conversations we're going to keep having at tackle. Bottom line, Jordan Seaton is where Ohio State turns at left tackle, and it's where they've been turning at left tackle for the last month and a half. The relationship is getting very, very, very improved, has gotten very improved from where it was 6 months ago. And now you get a little bit of extra time to figure out exactly how to navigate his process by getting him on campus for the Michigan State game on November 11th. I think that's good.
If they do miss, presumably on Baker this weekend, and then let's say they just get the vibe that Seaton's going to end up at Alabama or Florida State or wherever, do you think they do make a move for one of those in-state guys or the two, the brothers that are in-state that are committed to Michigan State, or do you think it's transfer portal, or any thoughts on that?
I think that they need to find at least one more in this prep ranks.
Yeah.
But you also have to understand there's a point of diminishing returns. So how far down your board are you willing to go for what you're going to get back? The bottom line is that as expensive as prep tackles are, and they are more expensive than they probably should be, considering the jump that it takes to be successful from high school to college on the offensive line, those fully established offensive tackles around the country in college football are just as expensive because those guys have actually proven it. Now, if we get to December, and this is entirely hypothesizing, let's say you get to December and what we've seen out of Alabama in the last couple of weeks continues, and it is a steady decline, and Nick Saban decides to move on or something, fought to retire or whatever because he's sick of the. I mean, did you see him walking off the field at last week? Oh boy, that guy just looked like he was just defeated. I don't think he is. He's the greatest college coach of all time. I'm sure he'll be fine, but at some point he's going to walk away. And if this season takes enough of a toll on him, and a guy like J.C. Latham becomes available again in January, then maybe you go that route. But I just don't think that's still not the way Ohio State wants to build their roster. They want to develop from within. But it's not always easy because the tackle position is such a premier spot, and it's hard to find college ready dudes. It's especially harder to find Ohio State level dudes. And then you have to wait 2 or 3 years generally until they're ready to contribute. So it does make sense to go through the portal instead, but you don't necessarily get a discount by doing so. I mean, you're still going to have to put together the NIL packages that are going to be expected when you know that the LSUs, Floridas, Georgias, et cetera. I mean, not that Georgia's taking a lot of transfers, but if they struggle offensively, then they would find a way to do whatever it takes. So, I just think Ohio State needs to be willing to do whatever it takes. You know what I mean? And you can wink, wink, nudge, nudge, whatever the hell that means to you. You've got to be willing to do whatever it takes.
Yeah, I'm with you. If Nick Saban were to resign tomorrow and they came out with an Alabama coaching hot list, do you think Brian Hartline would be listed on there just like he's listed on every single one, even when it makes absolutely zero sense at all?
The Brian Hartline, Jeremiah Smith, if Brian Hartline and Jeremiah Smith were being paid by each appearance on a list or a graphic that gets made by a national recruiting service, they'd be way wealthier than they already are, because it happens a lot. We're going to take a quick break, come back after this ad, whatever YouTube decides to run. We don't really know. We are always looking for sponsors. If you want to sponsor this show, you should. Not you, Andrew, but someone else out there in America. If you're looking for something to spend your money and have people that we want to talk about it, I'm willing to talk about anything as long as you're decent folks. We'll be right back. We are back. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast on the podcast. That's Andrew Ellis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. We got weird news last Friday night, as Dorian Brew, who in some people's minds is the number one ranked player in Ohio in the class of 2025. He's definitely one of the top 3 players in the state in that class, in my opinion, with Carter Lowe and Tavian St. Clair, up near that top of the list, is moving. He's moving to Texas. He has moved to Texas. He took off for Texas Conroy High School on Tuesday. And Andrew, it's weird. I mean, he was at Ohio State the last 2 weekends, making sure he got in some time with Tim Walton and the Buckeyes. His father is from that area. His father is in that area. He's going to live with his father and play ball in Texas. And I think that there's obviously a number of reasons why you do that. If you're a defensive back, you've got a lot more opportunity to play against better competition. You've got full-time speed training and football training and 7-on-7 and all that stuff. It's a big move for him for development's sake, especially now that he's committed to playing defensive back. His father was an Olympian at LSU. His father's from Houston. This is a move that makes some sense, but Buckeyes fans are, of course, going to be looking at it and getting concerned.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in my opinion, for the 2025 hot list or whatever, I would have had Dorian Brew and Devin Sanchez 1A and 1B on that list. And now, oddly enough, they're both going to be playing in Texas. I don't know. This one just kind of came out of nowhere. It seemed almost like it snuck up on the school side as well, just based on some of the things I read. But I mean, the kid loves Ohio State. He wasn't making all those trips to Columbus for no reason. I don't know the family dynamic completely. I know I did look at the school's website in Texas and saw his dad listed as a coaching staff member or something. I can't remember the exact position, but I don't know. This one seems kind of weird, but it's also shouldn't put you in full on panic mode yet, I wouldn't think, or anything. I know it's school ties to LSU and elsewhere, but we'll see.
His mom was a track and field athlete at Ohio State. She lives in the Dayton area. I mean, it's not my place to get into the full family dynamics, but as you mentioned, the most important thing is I don't really think that this affects Ohio State's recruitment of him. This kid that has lived in Ohio, he's grown up bit back and forth. I thought it was fascinating this summer. Devin Sanchez had posted a video of him working out with Dorian Brew in Texas. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. How do these guys know each other? And they've been reaching out to each other and getting to know one another. I would assume because of that there was at least a thought months ago that this was going to happen for Dorian Brew. I think you would prefer that it would have happened after the season, or so you don't go in the middle of the year and mess up what you've built with your team at Clayton Northmont. But it is what it is. As I said, he did visit Ohio State the last 2 weekends. Loved his time camping this summer with Tim Walton. It's one of the reasons why early in his recruitment, this is even before Ohio State offered, people were talking about Notre Dame or other schools. I'm like, the battle here was always going to be Ohio State versus LSU and A&M, because that's where his hearts are. That's where if you split his heart in half, he's got two of them. One is in the Texas, Houston area. One's in Columbus. And so that's really the battle. I think from an Ohio State perspective, you have built a really good relationship with him. You can feel confident about where it's going moving forward. I don't think this is a situation where the kid automatically says, okay, I'm from Texas now, y'all, and I'm going to pick them Aggies. Yoo-haw. It's not going to happen like that. But LSU, obviously Brian Kelly will get some boost out of this. You'll get to see him on campus a lot more. The DBU battle between Ohio State and LSU will get some run here, but it's not ideal for Ohio State, but it's not a big deal for Ohio State either, I think is the best way to look at this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he'll be back up here multiple times between now and whenever, and maybe him or Devin Sanchez ends up committing rather early and they can recruit one another to Columbus. I mean, you never know.
Yeah. And I think at this point, Tim Walton has done enough to be able to give some leeway and understanding that he knows what he's doing on the recruiting trail. And I think that you can feel confident that the Buckeyes are not going to let Dorian Brew move to Texas and then stop recruiting him or forget that he exists or anything like that. So unfortunate for Ohio football, because you don't want to see great players leave the state ever. But he's moving on and he's moved to Texas, and that's where he is now at Conroy High School. So good luck to Dorian down there. We appreciate getting to know him over the last year and a half in Ohio. I'm sure we'll see him again. Andrew, we're flying through this show kind of, which is nice. I don't feel like we're hurrying, but I also don't feel like we're lingering on things. But that means it's time for the 4-minute offense. What are your questions? What's on your mind?
I guess, first of all, offensive tackle, safety, defensive end is kind of what we're mostly talking about right now. And is it still just kind of the same old with safety, like wait and see? Does Terion Nichols make a visit during the season? And I mean, is there any, I assume nothing's changed in the last week since we've talked, but people are asking.
No. I mean, Terion Nichols is certainly a name that does not get talked about enough because he's listed as a cornerback on most national recruiting boards. He's playing safety for Withrow. He will be a safety in college. Ohio State is absolutely recruiting him. They are still recruiting Reggie Powers, who's played pretty well for Centerville this year and is playing more of that deep safety role that Ohio State wants to see what he looks like there. So I think you have two players there. Reggie Powers just made a big jump up the national rankings and the On3 rankings. So like people are noticing what he's doing. He's a solid player. That's the thing. He was always a solid player. That's why Ohio State offered him when they did. But then you start to think, hey, maybe we can reach for the stars here, and you don't get the stars of the KJ Bolden or the Zaquan Pattersons. I know it's going to sound like putting makeup on a pig, but if, in my opinion, if Ohio State can land Terion Nichols and Reggie Powers, I like the safety class, and I think it's a good group when you add them to Jalen McClain out of New Jersey. I think it's a good group. It's not great. It's not what you dream about, but that's why you hope that you can go out in 2025 and make sure that you hit it out of the park as the Buckeyes are doing at this point with like Fahim Delane or someone like that, who will be on Bermanology on Friday, by the way. That's where you go. The fact is, like Bronte Johnson, the Notre Dame commit, interestingly enough, like the Buckeyes are recruiting him. They're trying to get to figure out what he's all about, but he's almost exclusively playing offense this year in high school, which I don't know if that's because his coach thinks that's the best way to win games for his team. I don't know if it's because Bronte has changed his mind and wants to play offense. Like, he's a kid that Notre Dame's recruited to play safety. Ohio State's interested in him at safety. He probably should be playing safety in high school, but he's not. So you're not getting a full look at what he's capable of. And anything that you do recruiting wise there is a complete just projection, and that's a little bit risky.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think Reggie Powers is another one I was going to ask. I think naturally when something happens like this Mel Tucker situation, fans will go to the commitment list for said school and just kind of scroll down there and see if there's anybody that Ohio State can go and pluck. I remember Urban Meyer just taking half of Penn State's class back in the day when the whole Joe Paterno thing happened. But I don't know. I guess Reggie Powers is the one to watch. And then I personally am a fan of Nichols. I like that he's playing safety now, just kind of opens things up for him, I guess. But sticking inside this,
Ohio State fans shouldn't have ever forgotten to Ryan Nichols. He just decided to take his official visit to Ohio State, if he was going to take one, in the season and not during the summer. So he sort of put things on the back burner with the Buckeyes. It wasn't the other way around. So it'll be interesting to see how Perry Eliano responds there and if he's able to make that happen. My gut is that if Ohio State goes all in, that he will end up at Ohio State, but we'll see if where Eliano watches games next weekend to really get a sense of who top target is.
Right, that makes sense. And I think I know the answer to this, but somebody asked about it. Since Ohio State really needs edge guys right now, and I think Dominic Kirks kind of projects as more of an interior guy right now if he's already 250 plus. Is there any do you think that's one to even watch at all, or is that just probably not going to happen?
It's not a name I've ever heard mentioned by anyone at Ohio State. And you look at the rankings nationally, you look at the kid, he's close to home. You figure you could do a lot worse than a 6'4", 250-pound guy who's a 4-star on some sites, 3-star on others. I'm not sure why there hasn't been any real push from the Buckeyes there. He's more of a strong side defensive end type, and I think you have that with Edric Houston in this class, and so maybe you don't make that a priority. But again, the options seem somewhat limited, and there's not a bunch of new offers going out. We're 5 weeks into the high school football season, and there aren't a bunch of new defensive end offers going out. So I don't know where that guy's going to come from. That's the weirdest thing about this entire recruiting cycle to me, because you would think that at this juncture we would see offers going out. Now, on the same token, we didn't know that Ohio State offered Eric Mensah. So maybe Larry Johnson's offered kids that we just don't know about because he happens to recruit kids that don't talk or don't publicize their stuff, or he asks them not to. I don't know. But the bottom line for Ohio State is that they need a defensive end in this class that is a true edge rusher. They're obviously still in conversation and communication with Booker Pickett. You think you could get him on campus for an official visit at some point, but I don't know that he's a true edge or defensive end either. So where does that guy come from? If I'm standing on a mountaintop saying, and I have one recruiting question to yell into the universe for Ohio State in the class of 2024, it's where are the edge rushers? Because I don't know there's just doesn't seem to be any guy out there that they are committed to trying to get at in this class at this point.
Yeah, it's strange. We've talked about Larry Johnson's tactics for a long time.
I'm sure there is someone out there. I just don't know who it is, and I wish I could. Maybe there's other people on this beat that have a better sense of that have a better read on what Larry Johnson is doing. But I have not seen any indicator that there's a bunch of guys in the lineup getting ready to be offered by Ohio State or showing up to visit. So it's hard to see where it goes.
And even Charleston Collins, the Arkansas commit that we've mentioned multiple times, he looks like more of an interior guy too. Am I wrong on that?
I mean, he's bigger, but it's hard to project how these kids grow up. I mean, you look at a true edge rusher, that name and Marquise Lightfoot will always keep popping up. 6'5", 225 pounds. That's where you're seeing him. He'll grow to 245, 250, 255. If you're looking at kids who are already 245, 250, it's hard to imagine or them not growing to 275, 280. But that seems to be what Larry Johnson wants in all of his defensive ends. So I don't know. It's one of the stranger things in the last couple of years, because for a guy that's had as much success as he had with edge rushers, it seems like all of a sudden he doesn't recruit true defensive ends anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, it is kind of strange. There's just been so many weird ones that have kind of blown up. Was it Darius Slade? Was that his name? I always want to call him Dwayne. I always want to get him mixed up with the freaking cornerback for Bills Eagles. Darius Slade. Yeah. That's who it was, right? A while ago. Yes. And then even
New Jersey. Yeah.
Yeah. Even Javonte John Baptiste was a late one that he landed, and now they're going to be facing him this week. So I don't know. It's just weird. But anyway, last thing, 2025, is there anything you're watching right now? Anything you think is imminent? I know you went and saw Marquise Davis and Brandon Caesar, right? Last week. Any takeaways from anything you saw there, or anything to be on the lookout for?
No, I mean, what's interesting to me is that inside of Ohio in the class of 2025, you have some really good players like Marquise Davis, like Bo Jackson, like Luka Gilbert, like Trey McNutt, but now Dorian Brew moving on. But there doesn't seem to be any push from Ohio State to get anyone committed at this point. And I don't know if that's because they're just focused on the season and finishing the 2024 class. What they've done traditionally in the past is really wait till like January of like, so next, coming January to really push in that class. But there aren't many guys from around the country that, because NIL has changed things, like nobody wants to commit early. So the guys like Nate Roberts, who are the surefire takes, guys like TJ Alford down in Florida, like these guys who we thought maybe could be early decision makers, everyone is pulled back and is slowing down. But that's fine for Ohio State, because I think they want as many data points as possible before they have to say yes or no to someone anyway. So no, there's really nothing that you're like, oh, that's going to happen anytime soon. The Buckeyes would love for like Carter Lowe to say, yes, I'm ready to go, but that's not going to happen. They would be fine and happy if Trey McNutt said, I'm ready to go, but that's not wanting to happen. So Dorian Brew, like Devin Sanchez. I mean, I think you're actually more likely to see a kid like Devin Sanchez commit before any of these kids in Ohio, because Sanchez is further along in his process. And some of that is just a byproduct of Ohio high school recruiting being slowed down by not having 7-on-7 and not all the other stuff that you get and all the other spring football and all that stuff. But it's slow, and that is the God's honest truth. It is a slow time in recruiting, but the Buckeyes are working. And I think they love actually having more high school tape to watch before these kids are trying to jump into the boat.
Yeah, it's just weird because there's only a handful of guys left for 2024, and then, I mean, obviously the focus now is on the season, but I guess there is kind of that build up to that Penn State weekend, which is going to be another big one. And
yeah, that weekend, that visitor list is going to shape up to be absolutely monstrous on October 21st. So like, if you're looking for a time to circle, like when can momentum turn into results, like that's the weekend I think to really circle, but we have a month until then. So, and the home games, Ohio State is out on the road this weekend at Notre Dame, then they're off, then it's a home game against Maryland, then it's where Rutgers the week after. So at Rutgers. So you're not building the game time for Maryland has not been announced yet, I don't think, but it is homecoming. Generally that's a noon game. Like it's not going to be a huge recruiting weekend either. Everything is geared towards that Penn State game and then the Michigan State game 2 weeks later. So it's going to be a little bit of this until then, folks. A nice casual breeze, just nice and easy, just the way we like it. That's the way we like it. Andrew, is there anything else that's on your mind that you want to talk about?
Not really. I think that's about it. Just excited for this weekend. Excited to kind of see what goes down. Jealous you get to make the trip to South Bend, and
Yeah, I'm super excited to. Notre Dame is one of those places where I've always wanted to watch a football game, and the fact that I get to do it on the field is something that I do not take for granted, and I'm glad to get the chance to cross that one off the old bucket list. But there's a lot of conversation about that happening. Friday morning, we will have the podcast Daily Bold Predictions. We'll have a weekend kickoff show with Bobby Carpenter and Zach Bourne. We will have Bermanology with Fahim Delane later in the afternoon for your recruiting joys out there. And then we will have a busy weekend in South Bend. So for Andrew Ellis, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff on the podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.